All right. So um, today in RLA reading, which we're working in today, and I think I just assigned the lesson to everybody, so that should pop up for you guys in your assignments. We are moving away from nonfiction, which we've been working on in both social studies, and we talked about the overlap between social studies and language arts in this way, and those similar skill sets of understanding main ideas and details and supporting evidence and all of those sort of roles, and we're flipping to something a little bit new by looking at literary works, by looking at fiction works. So some of those skills still apply, as far as like main ideas and things like that. But there's a whole other sort of set of ideas that go along with literature and fiction writing that is going to require some other, types of understanding. So things like figurative language and themes and details and understanding characters and character traits and things like that. So today we'll start with figurative language and understanding, how we use figurative language. And again, that goes along with creative writing, right? It's not so dry that we're just giving you, ideas and supporting details and facts. Literary works and creative works are painting a picture. They want you to use your imagination. So it uses much more colorful language and ways of describing things. So that's what we'll deal with now for a few weeks. Let's take a look at our lesson.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. This is the lesson on figurative language. This lesson will help you determine the meaning of figurative language used in a text, including metaphors and similes.
Right.
All English words and phrases have a literal meaning. The literal meaning is the basic meaning that most English speakers will understand. Some words and phrases, however, also have a figurative meaning. A figurative meaning is a hidden meaning.
I understand why the audio is skipping. Let me restart that and see if it helps. Hopefully everybody can hear it.
Phrases have a literal meaning. The literal meaning is the basic meaning that most English speakers will understand. Some words and phrases, however, also have a figurative meaning. A figurative meaning is a hidden meaning that some people might miss. Let me give you an example. A few months ago, Maria hosted the board game night. At one point, Wayne suggested that we order pizza. We've been playing for a while, so that seemed like a good idea to me. I said, I'm so hungry I can eat a horse. That's figurative language. I wasn't literally thinking of eating a horse. I was just sort of joking that I was hungry enough to eat a horse. Almost everyone at the table had heard the expression before, so they knew that I wasn't serious. They knew that I wasn't literally going to eat a horse. I was speaking figuratively. Not everyone got the joke, though. Maria's friend, Alonza, seemed to think that horse meat was a pizza topping, and she didn't like the idea. Alonza asked if we could get horse on only half the pizza. That's when I realized the problem. As a recent immigrant, Alonza is still learning English. She's probably never even heard someone say they were hungry enough to eat a horse. We all explained to Alonza that horse is not a traditional pizza topping in the US. Once we explained everything, she agreed that she was hungry enough to eat a horse too. So you ready to get started? We have a lot of figurative language to cover.
All right, that just strikes me as funny. That idea. Can we get horse on half the pizza? I still honestly, I think horse on pizza would be better than pineapple. I'd be willing to give it a try. Yeah, so this is the thing too, and it's just kind of funny. But that's kind of the thing, though. Particularly, if for people everybody, every language and every culture has some type of figurative language that is distinct to them. And, if you're sort of outside of that, that figurative language might not, really connect with you, and you might have a different meaning of it, or you might take it literally, right? Literally is also a word that we misuse, or a lot of people misuse in our language today. They'll say things like, I literally died. Well, no, you didn't, because you would be dead, right? They just completely misunderstand the idea of literal. Literal is when you are stating things as is. Figurative is when you're using this expressive language and changing the idea there to express another idea. So let's take a look then at some of the metaphors and similes here and how we use
There
those.
are lots of types of figurative language. Each one works a little differently. Let's start with metaphors and similes. You might already be familiar with both. A metaphor is an implied comparison between two things. The important word here is implied. A metaphor doesn't actually make a literal comparison. Instead, a metaphor uses a substitute word or phrase to imply a comparison. Let me show you what I mean. I'll show you how to turn a few sentences into metaphors. That way you can see how they work. I'll start with the sentence, learning to ski is easy. That's a literal statement. That's not a metaphor. With this sentence, I'm saying that it isn't difficult to learn to ski. If I want to turn this sentence into a metaphor, I could replace the phrase is easy with the phrase is a breeze. Now the sentence reads, learning to ski is a breeze. This is not a literal statement. The speaker isn't saying that skiing is a gentle wind. That wouldn't make any sense. The speaker is figuratively saying is that learning to ski is as easy as a breeze is gentle.
And there's a ton of those that would apply as metaphors that you could use for that sentence as well. You think about learning to ski is a piece of cake, right? That's another metaphor. Learning to ski is no sweat. Those things are all metaphors here.
Now suppose I said the library has many books. That's a literal statement, not a metaphor. With this sentence, I'd be saying that the library has a lot of books. But let's say the library has a lot of books. Like maybe this library has so many books that you can't even walk down an aisle. The word many just wouldn't be enough, right? I would need a metaphor to explain just how many books this library has. What if I replace the phrase many books with the phrase a sea of books? That would compare the number of library books with the huge amount of water in the sea. This metaphor makes it sound like way more than just many books. A simile works the same way as a metaphor, with one important difference. A simile is a figurative comparison that uses the word like or as. Let me show you what I mean. The sentence, learning to ski is easy, might become, learning to ski is as easy as a breeze. See the word as in there? That gives you a hint that this is a simile. You might also notice that this simile kept the word easy instead of replacing it with breeze, the way a metaphor would. Similes sometimes do that. What about this sentence? The library has many books. To make a simile, you can change the sentence to read, the library is like a sea of books. So that's what's up with metaphors and simile. Let's see if you've got this.
Yeah, and that's basically the only difference between a metaphor and a simile. Similes use like or as to make that distinction when you're comparing something. I could say my boss is a tyrant or my boss is a dictator. She's not. She's a good person. Or I could say my boss is like a tyrant or my boss is like a dictator. It's a matter a lot of times it's just style and what you're trying to explain, where writers may use that differently. A metaphor is a little more poetic a lot of times, right? And it draws on the imagination. Yeah, so like Neil is saying, I told you a million times, which we're going to talk about. Now that is more of hyperbole,
What
which
type
is
of
another
figurative
form.
language does this quote use?
But figurative language here. So our let's see what we got here, passage-wise. So this is an excerpt from The Eyes Have It by Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick is a well-known science fiction writer, and you may not know his name, but you probably have seen a movie or TV show that was adapted from his works, like Blade Runner and Man in the High Castle. Forgetting, there's all kinds of them. Terminator was actually one that was inspired by his works as well. But anyway, let's take a look at the passage here. It says, I was quite by accident, I discovered this incredible invasion of Earth by life forms from another planet. As yet, I haven't done anything about it. I can't think of anything to do. I wrote to the government and they sent back a pamphlet on the repair and maintenance of frame houses. Anyhow, the whole thing is known. I'm not the first to discover it. Maybe it's even under control. I was sitting in my easy chair, idly turning the pages of a paperback book someone had left on the bus when I came across the reference that first put me on the trail. For a moment, I didn't respond. It took some time for the full import to sink in. I'd comprehended. It seemed odd I hadn't noticed it right away. The reference was clearly to a non-human species of incredible properties, not indigenous to Earth. A species, I hasten to point out, customarily masquerading as ordinary human beings. Their disguise, however, became transparent in the face of the following observations by the author. It was at once obvious the author knew everything, and was taking it in his stride. The line, and I tremble remembering it even now, read. His eyes slowly roved about the room. Vague chills assailed me. I tried to picture the eyes. Did they roll like dimes? The passage indicated not. They seemed to move through the air, not over the surface. Rather rapidly, apparently. No one in the story was surprised. That's what tipped me off. No sign of amazement at such an outrageous thing. Later, the matter was amplified. His eyes moved from person to person. There it was in a nutshell. The eyes had clearly come apart from the rest of him and were on their own. My heart pounded and my breath choked in my windpipe. I had stumbled on an accidental mention of a totally unfamiliar race, obviously non-terrestrial. Yet, to the characters in the book, it was perfectly natural, which suggested they belonged to the same species. And the author? A slow suspicion burned in my mind. The author was taking it rather too easily in his stride. Evidently, he felt this was quite a usual thing. He made absolutely no attempt to conceal this knowledge. So that is an excerpt from The Eyes Have It. So that's a short story by Philip K. Dick. And so vague chills assailed me. I tried to picture the eyes. Did they roll like dimes? So that's a simile. And the phrase like is what we're looking for there. So eyes roll like dimes, right? That our tip off that it's a simile. So what it then is it suggesting, right? So that's sort of the difference there. So it's suggesting that the eyes might roll the way dimes roll, right? So
Great job. Right away, the word like stands out. This is a simile. The narrator compares the movement of dimes to the possible movement of eyes. The author imagines that a pair of disembodied eyes might roll around like dimes.
all right. Great job. Right.
Remember,
Okay.
figurative language isn't about dealing with literal stuff. Figurative language is about ideas. In fact, if you take it literally, some figurative language can sound pretty funny. Take a look at this sentence. I threw back the curtains and was greeted by the sun. Can you imagine being greeted by the sun? That would be pretty weird, right? This kind of figurative language is called personification. Personification gives human characteristics to inanimate objects or ideas. The sun
And also animals. You can personify animals as
can't
well.
literally greet you. That would be silly and probably blinding. If you personify the sun, though, it can greet you figuratively. Here are a few more examples. The tree reached for the sky. The sun surrendered to night. The leaf danced in the wind. Do you see how personification works? A tree doesn't move on its own. It can't reach for the sky or anything else. We're only speaking figuratively here. What about the sun? It can't decide to surrender to anything. The sun is just a big ball of hot plasma. What about this leaf here? Can it dance? No, it sure can't. Leaves don't have the legs for it. But again, this language isn't supposed to be taken literally. So figurative language can make me think of something in a different way. The sun can say hello. Trees can reach. Leaves can dance. Symbolism works in a similar way. Symbolism is when something literal is used to represent an idea. Here's a symbol you should recognize. Without symbolism, this is just a flag, but we know this is our flag. This is Old Glory, the stars and stripes, the bars and stars. To Americans, the American flag represents freedom, justice, and strength. If space aliens came to Earth, though, they might think this was some kind of tablecloth or something. Symbolism only works if you can see what's being symbolized. Literature uses a lot of symbolism, so keep an eye out for anything that seems to mean more than its literal meaning. Say you're reading a story and it describes a set of black curtains. The color black is often used to symbolize death. If someone passes through the black curtains, for example, that might symbolize dying. What about a chain? A chain is made of links that join together, so a chain might symbolize people coming together. Really, it depends on the context. Keep an eye out. If you find something that has more than its literal meaning, you might have found a symbol. So far, so good. You're doing well. Before we go on, though, let's check your learning.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism used in literary works. There's a lot of symbolism used in visual arts too, as far as movies and TV and things like that, and sort of repetitive ideas that come back again and again and again. Same thing, like you mentioned, like the American flag. There's other, symbolic images that we think about with the United States, the eagle, right? The bald eagle, or the Statue of Liberty and stuff that sort of symbolize and embody the ideas. And when we see them, we automatically recognize that. It's the same thing with literature too. Authors are very cognizant of certain visuals and certain ideas, so they would use those to sort of convey that. Sometimes it's very subtle and we miss it. And other, some people pick up on it, some people don't. And it sort of depends. You might pick up on one thing one time that somebody else doesn't, and vice versa. You miss that symbolism. But that is an idea there. So the whole thing here is really about that imaginative side of writing and stoking somebody's imagination when they're reading.
The idea that a pair of eyes can move around on its own is an example of.
Yeah, so this is personification, right? If eyes can move on their own, eyes are part of your body. They are not your whole body, and eyes alone are just a thing. So giving them other qualities because they move around on their own or something like that is giving them a quality of a person. So if eyes can move on their own, that would make them
Great job.
like a person.
You've got the idea. Personification gives human characteristics to inanimate objects. Human beings can move around of their own free will. By imagining that eyes can move about on their own free will, the author is personifying eyes.
Yeah, and personification is very common, and it's just really rolled into a lot of what we read. Particularly like they mentioned, using words like the leaves danced or the tree reaches. Just you step back and think about, can those objects really do those things. No, because they're not people. They don't dance. Only humans dance. Well, I guess some animals do for mating or fighting and things like that. But you see the point, right? But you can also see when you give things these human qualities, how that starts to stoke your imagination. How that works to draw a picture for you. So let's keep going.
Have you ever heard someone exaggerate to make a point? One time, my uncle said to me, "You snore louder than a jackhammer." That's a kind of figurative language called hyperbole. Hyperbole is when you outrageously exaggerate something in order to make a point. So here, my uncle wasn't literally saying that I snore louder than a jackhammer. He was just using hyperbole to make the point that I snore loudly. Here's a few more examples. My work commute is 1,000,000,000 miles each way. Jessica's dog is as big as a house. It's raining cats and dogs. None of these sentences is literally true. No one drives 1,000,000,000 miles to work. No one's dog is the size of a house. Not outside of 2 children's hands anyway. And no, it can't literally rain cats and dogs. It's all figurative language. All of this is hyperbole. Irony works a little differently. Irony is when a word or phrase says the opposite from what you expect it to say. If I walk into a messy apartment and say, "I see you cleaned up the place," then I'm being ironic. I'm criticizing the apartment for being messy by pretending to compliment it for being clean. Irony relies on context. You have to see what the irony is commenting on, or you won't understand the irony. If someone heard me say, "I see you cleaned up the place," without seeing the messy apartment, they might think I was being literal. By the way, when irony is used to mock someone, it's called sarcasm. This comment here, the one about the apartment, that would count as sarcasm. In this example, I'm mocking someone for having a messy apartment. That's irony used as sarcasm. Let's go through a few more examples of irony. On the left, I'll put the context. On the right, I'll give an example of an ironic statement for this context. There. So, do you see how this works? A statement only becomes ironic in the right context. There's nothing special about saying, "Lovely weather we're having today," unless the weather isn't lovely. The context creates an expectation. If it's raining, you expect people to complain about the rain. You don't expect folks to say that it's lovely. That's the irony. Well, that's everything that I meant to cover. Let's test your learning.
Yeah, irony sometimes is hard for people to grasp. And this time, when it's sarcasm, usually most people understand it. There's another sort of form of sarcasm that's being facetious, when you make light of a serious situation. Like maybe you're having a really bad day. You get a flat on your tire and find out that you owe back taxes or whatever it may be, and you're just like, well, I'm just having the best day ever. That's sort of being facetious, which is also sort of part of sarcasm. But yeah, irony is also used in other ways in literary works. Characters often find themselves in ironic situations to sort of build plots and things like that. So let's take a look
What
here.
type of figurative language does this quote use?
Okay, now we're Ayn Rand. Okay. So here, the main characters run away from his society where all people are supposed to be the same. The individual doesn't matter to society, only the group. Everyone is meant to use the word we. The word I is forbidden and forgotten. The character has just learned the word I. It was when I read the first of the books I found in my house that I saw the word I. And when I understood this word, the book fell from my hands, and I wept. I, who had never known tears, I wept in deliverance and in pity for all mankind. I understood the blessed thing which I had called my curse. I understood why the best in me had been my sins and my transgressions, and why I had never felt guilt in my sins. I understood that centuries of change and lashes will not kill the spirit of man, nor the sense of truth within him. I read many books for many days. Then I called the golden one, and I told her what I had read and what I had learned. She looked at me, and the first words she spoke were, "I love you." Then I said, "My dearest one, it is not proper for men to be without names. There was a time when each man had a name of his own to distinguish him from all other men. So let us choose our names. I have read of a man who lived many thousands of years ago, and all of the names in these books, his is the one I wish to bear. He took the light of the gods and he brought it to men, and he taught men to be gods. And he suffered for his deed as all bearers of light must suffer. His name was Prometheus. It shall be your name, said the golden one. And I have read of a goddess, I said, who was the mother of the earth and of all the gods. Her name was Gaia. Let this be your name, my golden one, for you are to be the mother of a new kind of gods. It shall be my name, said the golden one. Now I look ahead. My future is clear before me. The saint of the pyre had seen the future when he chose me as his heir, as the heir of all the saints and all the martyrs who came before him and who died for the same cause, for the same word, no matter what name they gave to their cause and their truth. I shall live here in my house, in my own house. I shall take my food from the earth by the toil of my own hands. I shall learn many secrets from my books. Through the years ahead, I shall rebuild the achievements of the past and open the way to carry them further. The achievements which are open to me, but closed forever to my brothers, for their minds are shackled to the weakest and dullest ones among them. I have learned that my power of the sky was known to men long ago. They called it electricity. It was the power that moved their greatest inventions. It lit this house with light, which came from those globes of glass in the walls. I have found the engine which produced this light. I shall learn how to repair it and how to make it work again. I shall learn how to use the wires which carry this power. Then I shall build a barrier of wires around my home and across the paths which lead to my home, a barrier light as a cobweb, more impassable than a wall of granite, a barrier my brothers will never be able to cross, for they have nothing to fight me with save the brute force of their numbers. I have my mind. Even here we see some metaphors, a barrier or similes, a barrier light as a cobweb, talking about light, creating this barrier that they can't pass, but light as a cobweb, right? Okay, but anyway, I understood that centuries of change and lashes will not kill the spirit of man is hyperbole. So the author is sort of exaggerating the suffering of man to create to make a point, not to create sarcasm, but to make a point. So here, hyperbole, the author is exaggerating the suffering there, which is not really surprising for
Great job.
the author.
The narrator imagines that
That
not
particular
even the
author.
worst ceaseless torture would kill the spirit of man. He's exaggerating the suffering of man to make a point. The point is that even though mankind has been oppressed, its human spirit is intact.
All right. And there we are up to our practice
Hey,
questions.
good work on those
Let's take about 15 minutes till about 1:50 there if you want to work on our practice questions. And we'll come back and we'll take a look at our answers. So I'll go ahead and pause